Okay, good morning and welcome everyone to this webinar. Um, it's top of the hour, so I think we will get going with the webinar. This webinar has titled Biodiversity Credit in Practice, First Lessons Learned from Piloting Biodiversity Credits in European Wetlands. And we are very excited to invite you all to share some learnings and experiences from the BiodiversityCrEW project. So this webinar is organized by the Eurosite, NABU, bloomlabs, European Landowners Organization, Sylva, aeco. And the objective with this webinar is really to kind of learn more about the potential of using biodiversity credits as an instrument to improve European wetlands, and also to share some very early learnings from the work of in trying to source and design projects for biodiversity credits in wetlands. So my name is Martin Pilstjärna. I'm a co-founder of an NGO recently started called Nordic Nature Market Initiative. I'm also part of the working group for nature finance and private land conservation that was launched by Eurosite quite recently to support various LIFE projects. I have a background in working with nature markets as methodology and project developer, primarily in forests. So it's very exciting to be here and to take part of these experiences from wetland ecosystems. So I think before we go into the practicalities of today's webinar, I would like to give the word to Harm Schoten, the director of Eurosite, for some opening words. So over to you, Harm.
Thank you very much, Martin. Dear participants, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you on behalf of the LIFE BiodivCrEW team, the project partners, and Eurosite, the European Land Conservation Network. As you know, last year the European Commission launched a roadmap towards nature credits, a bottom-up approach to incentivize private investments into actions that protect and preserve nature and reward those that invest in them. Science tells us that 2/3 of the EU's added economic value depend on nature and its ecosystem services. Today, climate risk and biodiversity loss could cost farms and businesses up to 7% of their yearly profits. So nature credits represent an opportunity, and not more than that, for both business and nature restoration simultaneously. They will boost biodiversity while generating revenue for investors. And they offer new income opportunities for farmers, foresters, fishers, landowners, and local communities. So we think blending public and private finance will be essential to deliver results at scale and speed. And then the roadmap aims to develop clear standards and reliable certification for these nature positive actions. And this webinar and the Biodiversity Credits Project aims to contribute to that. I would like to end my words with a thank you to the EU LIFE program. A strong and independent EU LIFE program is essential to deliver Europe's climate, biodiversity, and economic agenda. Well, I hope you enjoy listening. Back to you, Martin.
Thanks for that, Harm. For sure, we have a really interesting agenda today and a strong lineup with speakers that will be presenting. Before we go into the actual sessions, I would just like to go through some housekeeping rules. So as you probably are familiar with, during webinars, we like to have the audio and video function disabled to just have a smooth webinar flow. We really encourage you to submit your questions during the presentations to us using the chat box. And this is really, I think, important feedback for us to be given. We will bring up those questions after each presentation. And I think try, if possible, to stick as much as possible to the actual topic of the presentation when you post your questions. We welcome all questions, but we will particularly focus on bringing up those questions that really relates to the topic that each presenter will bring. And then yeah, this webinar, as you might have understood, is being recorded. So if you miss out on certain parts of it will be possible to get access to the recording afterwards. And this is a quite lengthy webinar. It's almost 2 hours, so please be prepared with some coffee and snacks to be able to endure. Okay, we can have a look at the agenda. Um, so we will be starting with a presentation by Simas Gardekas from bloomlabs. He will be going through findings from a benchmark study of credit schemes, where various credit schemes were compared, and he will also give a market overview and some definitions. We will then enter the second session where we'll be giving insights from uh, sourcing biodiversity credit projects from Inga Kutze at Eurosite. Then we will also be giving information and examples from two different biodiversity credit potential two projects that will be pitched. And then we will end this webinar with a presentation by Mark Maleka from Sylva. He will be talking very much about project finance and give us some insights into, let's say, the realities of biodiversity credit financing, the challenges. And then I will end this webinar with some closing remarks. So that is what we have in front of us. I think we can, before I will leave the stage to Simas, we can just go through some of the, let's say, context from a policy perspective, as well as from a biodiversity market perspective. And obviously, as many of you know, market-based solutions are not new in any way. It was formally recognized during COP15 as a specific target in the global biodiversity framework. So that was very exciting that biodiversity credit was mentioned there. And since then, there's been intense work, mainly within the global integrity initiatives, biodiversity credit alliance, and an international advisory panel on biodiversity credits on building consensus around integrity. And the landmark outcome was the high-level principles, a document that contains a number of core integrity requirements for credit schemes. Then lately, last year, we were, of course, very excited to see the roadmap being published from the European Commission on nature credits. The idea is to basically explore the potential of a European-wide certification system for nature credits or biodiversity credits. And the work is now carried out within an SI-appointed expert group along 5 major work streams: methodology, metrics, governance, integrity, market readiness, policy coherence, and international collaboration. So for sure, there is exciting work that is being done right now within Europe, within this field. So with that said, as a context to the webinar, I will hand over to the first speaker, Simas Garadekas at bloomlabs. And Simas is probably well known for many of you. He started bloomlabs together with a colleague, and the idea is to provide the market with market analytics and also analysis on biodiversity credit markets. So, Simas, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Here we go. Can you see my screen? I hope silence is yes. So hello, good morning, everyone. So great to see so many of you, so many familiar names. Today, I'll set the scene. I'll talk about the very basics of biodiversity credits, some of the numbers, market numbers behind the markets, and then discuss the early work for a project, LIFE BiodivCrEW project in the European wetlands. So let's dig straight in. Very quickly, Martin already shared a bit about what we do at bloomlabs. We're basically a biodiversity credit market intelligence company. We want to collate all the key information in structured formats to help move this market forward. And we do that in 3 ways. We have a product called Bloom, which is a market intelligence platform. for biodiversity credits. We also do quite some consulting and advisory work in the space, and we have a newsletter that I believe might be useful to quite a couple of folks, where we try to yeah communicate the complexities uh, in more simple terms without oversimplifying this market. So I'll start with a very basic question, which has been the number one question we received for the past 4 years. Nothing has changed. What is a biodiversity credit? So the official definition, if you can call it in the voluntary market, is that a biodiversity credit is a certificate that represents a measured and evidence-based unit of positive biodiversity outcome that is durable and additional to what otherwise would have occurred. In short, you can consider it to be a standardized unit of biodiversity gain or avoided loss. The standardized unit is the key bit. And most biodiversity credits will follow this meta unit that can be expressed in a certain outcome or activity, certain area size, and a certain time period. We don't have a single ton of CO2 as a key, standardized unit in this space, but we have at least key variables that usually are used for, issuance of every single biodiversity credit. Now let's dig into a single example. There's a couple of steps to calculate biodiversity credits. Step one is usually to just measure biodiversity metrics, and you have a couple of different categories, starting with species, uh, looking into particular single species, their abundance, how endemic they are, etc., and trying to derive, let's say, the meaning it has on the condition of that habitat. That is quite a popular category. However, the most popular one is ecosystem level category of biodiversity metrics, and it includes metrics such as, or indicators such as species richness, diversity, habitat connectivity, etc. And then we have the third metric, or third category of metrics, which we call other. These are basically metrics that do not directly describe the biodiversity state, but are still very important in assessing how successful that biodiversity credit project is. So it can focus on socioeconomic state, let's say metrics, governance metrics, social state, property management, uncertainty levels. All of these can be included in credit calculation as well. And here on the right, you see some of the key voluntary biodiversity credit schemes categorized according to which categories of metrics it uses to quantify their biodiversity credits. You can see in the middle, some use all three types, others only focus on ecosystem, others only species. It varies. Now, you put all of these metrics together into a formula, and then you just have to multiply it by area size. That's custom for most biodiversity credit schemes. And finally, we derive a credit unit. Some examples are a 1% uplift or avoided loss in the median value of the basket of metrics over 1 hectare for 20 years. So as you can see, 1%, 1 hectare, 20 years. It follows the same exact structure that we've outlined earlier. And there are a couple of other examples. Most schemes will fall into this, uh, let's say, meta unit. Now, uh, let's dig into the actual numbers behind the market. Let's start off with the supply side. So here we see a line graph of the number of different voluntary biodiversity credit schemes we have been keeping track of. And as you can see, since 2020 to 2024, there's been an explosion on the supply side of different voluntary biodiversity credit schemes. Uh, let's say the key moment probably is the Global Biodiversity Framework in 2022 that galvanized this movement. And now, since 2025, we're seeing a consolidation of sorts happening where some schemes are either being rolled or methodologies being rolled into a single standard. Some are discontinued. New ones are created, but now we're at this stage where not that many new schemes are created, and the ones that were developed are entering the market and maturing. The next one is the most let's say granular data on the biodiversity credit sales we have. And as you can see, since the beginning of 2022, where to consider the market wasn't you know a bit of an overstatement. We have climbed in volume and transaction size steadily since then. Still, obviously, it's a very small market, but we have to remember that it came across or developed organically without real mandate and uh, we really see a lot of voluntary demands to make this market work. In comparison, though, the compliance biodiversity markets, depending on the year, globally might be worth anywhere from $5 to $15 billion. So, the magnitude of difference in size is here. However, now with the European Nature Credit Roadmap and increased, let's say, policymaker interest in this space, there's quite some overlap between the volunteer markets and the experimentation it leads to that can be integrated into policy decisions, we believe. So there's a lot of potential in the volunteer market. Now, some data on the key buyers in the market. And as you can see, we do not know every single buyer in the space. The data is quite hard to come by, but from all the data we could collect, you can see that three key sectors dominate. So the public sector, finance, and transport, with other sectors such as tech, media, etc., hospitality also becoming more pronounced. But again, it's early data, hard to make strong, let's say, assumptions of that, but we can already see which sectors are engaging the earliest, at least. Now, I want to share a bit some more interactive data, and I'll preview our platform or second version of our platform that we haven't yet launched right here. So hopefully you see an actual map, and here you'll be able to, in the next few weeks, I hope, you'll be able to access it yourselves. And here we've tried to share how the market looks like across a couple of different layers. Layer one is just projects, where the projects are located. And as you can see, LATAM and especially South America is very well represented. The larger the bubble, the bigger the project is, with Africa, southern and western parts also quite active, and Oceania being very active as well. Now, Europe, you can see a lot of dots, but these are small dots. It's unsurprising that in Europe we have a lot of activity, but these are relatively smaller projects that are consistently, let's say, different in size compared to especially projects in the global south. Now, let's take a look at the transactions layer. And here you see some of the key projects and where they're based on sales. So the two key hotspots of early voluntary biodiversity sales are in Europe and Oceania. Let's take a look at Europe since that's the focus of today. Germany, France, Spain, and the UK are the four key countries where larger and more consistent transactions have taken place. Now, let's take a look at the buyers. Where are the buyers? This is, again, incomplete data. We don't have every single buyer in our database, but it's very clear that from what we have, 95% of buyers, both in volume of credits and in total transaction amount, these are local buyers. So the projects or buyers will be looking for projects based in the country of their operations or their headquarters. That's a consistent theme we see. It's way more localized than, for example, a market such as voluntary carbon market. The local effects are immense, and we need to keep that in mind as we design this market for Europe and beyond. And that's about that. I'll move on to the early demand drivers. So from what we've seen so far, again, local focus that I just shared, very important. Bottom-up, local, community-led projects that are close to buyers are prioritized. So, it matters which credit scheme you're using, but also the project itself means a lot, and you need to communicate it as an exceptional, different project to have a chance to sell it to buyers, especially the local ones. Then we've seen policy support be very important. So some sales, especially in England and France, were built on compliance biodiversity market foundations. So methods to issue compliance credits were used to issue voluntary credits, and that additional layer of trust helped galvanize some of that early demand. Uh, then we also see the connection with carbon being very important. We're seeing stacking, bundling, nesting, so different ways of combining carbon and biodiversity credits uh, lead to additional sales, and especially for carbon markets, quantifying and unitizing biodiversity on top of carbon credits has been the biggest source of biodiversity, let's say, unit demand that is not reflected in voluntary biodiversity sales. Is just reflected in the price increase for nature-based carbon credits. And also, we've seen some interesting innovation with connecting biodiversity credits with sales of unrelated products, such as tickets or limited edition fashion products, etc., to really communicate to more, let's say, nature conscious communities and sell your products to them. We've seen quite some promising experiments, especially in Australia, for that. Now, let's dig into the actual project that we're part of for the European wetlands. The project that we're part of is called LIFE BiodivCrEW, and the goal is to test out biodiversity credits in European wetlands. It's an experimental project that is meant to lead to interesting evidence data points that could inform the commission to decide what next steps they should take to best support nature finance. Some of the key work packages include benchmarking biodiversity certification and credit schemes on wetlands. So that was our responsibility at bloomlabs. The next one is sourcing and classifying project sites. Then we will work on applying them and developing actual projects using these schemes. And finally, we're looking to achieve demand proof points with the business development work package. Now, let's focus on scheme benchmarking. Here's a quick overview of what we did over the past year. First of all, we started with scheme mapping and identifying, again, every single voluntary biodiversity credit scheme globally. And that's where that number of 90 plus came from in an earlier chart. We then went through various rounds of pre-selection to define to decide which credit schemes have the highest potential for the European wetlands. And then we collected very extensive data on these schemes. Once we have collected that data, we went into the scheme assessment stage, where we developed a list or framework of best practice parameters applicable to the European wetlands. And based on them, we then developed an assessment and selection criteria that we use to assess and score the schemes we have pre-selected. So that led to multiple rounds of say scoring and criteria review. That led us to the final selection of 2 credit schemes that I will share more about in just a minute. Now, this is how the scheme pre-selection process went. We basically went through 3 stages and went from 91 schemes to 8. Then for the schemes we have selected, these are the logos, these are the descriptions. Unfortunately, I do not have the time to go into every single one of them, but you will have the slides after the webinar. These are the 8 schemes we have then analyzed in as much depth as we could. And then we have the criteria developed were used to assess these schemes. We primarily worked to build on top of what already exists instead of further developing new assessments frameworks and potentially fragmenting the market further. That is why we have decided to build directly on top of the Biodiversity Credit Alliance's high-level principles. So the outcomes, equity, and governance categories of the criteria come directly from the high-level principles. We did adjust a lot of the criteria within these categories for the European and especially the European wetland context, though. Then we have conducted various expert interviews. We have analyzed scientific literature, market standards and principles beyond the volunteer biodiversity market as well. We looked at the EU policy priorities, and then together with the project steering committee, we have agreed on the final list of criteria. And one key difference, one key difference from the high-level principles is the implementation category we added, which is inseparable at this early stage, especially in the market, from theoretical, let's say, criteria and qualities of a scheme. We need to be sure that we can apply them on the ground in a timely manner, in a cost-effective manner, and it is practical. So we added 6 implementation-focused criteria as well. Now, let's get into the few selected schemes we have. First one was Vera, and some of the selection reasons we have. This is not exhaustive. Unfortunately, I do not have too much time to dig into this too deeply, but Vera is a well-known standard that some might love, some might hate, but it has institutional credibility that helps a lot with early buyer conversations, and that's that practical, let's say, implementation category that comes to play here. It is based on a ecosystem condition-based biodiversity accounting. So their credits directly represent ecosystem condition, which is aligned with nature reporting frameworks, which use ecosystem condition as usually the key way to measure nature. It also has high flexibility in indicator selection within clear methodological guardrails. We've realized how important it is for us to be able to decide which indicators and metrics we need to measure to represent biodiversity gains, especially for wetlands, since they can differ so much from let's say the mandated indicators. So we simply could not use some credit schemes that mandated us to use a select number of indicators that simply do not represent what we're doing. So the fact that we could have that flexibility with Vera was very important. Additionally, they have credit stacking support, which again, we don't have to combine biodiversity credits with carbon, but having that optionality helps. It always helps to have that flexibility. And then it has a multi-metric interoperable biodiversity credit unit. And what I mean by that is that technically it can be interoperable with many other biodiversity credit schemes and their credits because it has a standardized outcome-based unit that clearly represents the outcome, the area size, and the duration of the credit that then can be adjusted to or compared against others in some way. It's not ideal, but it's something. Additionally, it also has an active project pipeline and also in Europe. So it's very important for us to know that this scheme is being used in practice and learnings can be disseminated with us as well. The Wallacea Trust also has been selected for quite similar reasons. It has a very similar biodiversity credit unit. It is very flexible in indicator selection. It is quite easy to use for ecologists and conservation practitioners, we've realized. And that's, again, a practical reason, but it helps a lot if we want to quickly experiment and apply these projects on the ground. It has a very active project pipeline with it's the most active and largest project pipeline in the market so far, which is very helpful for us, again, to understand what works and what doesn't in real time. And again, it's highly flexible, lightweight, and responsive as a methodology itself. I'll stop here and just share a couple of takeaways. First of all, nobody will deny that the voluntary biodiversity market is still very early. More concepts are not yet clearly defined, and more alignment is definitely needed in defining common credit units, biodiversity indicators, claims, and demand drivers. Why would buyers even buy these credits? We need more clarity there in the language itself. And we do hope that the European Commission and its integrated roadmap can play an important role here. the next takeaway is that most schemes are implicitly designed for biodiversity-rich regions outside of Europe. Um, a lot of these schemes, certification, monitoring costs involved with them are simply prohibitive for small projects, let's say sub 50 hectare projects in Europe. You can forget about it for the most part. We need to make sure that um, there's schemes that can apply to these smaller fragmented landscapes that are a part of the European nature. The next one is that the market requires supportive frameworks. The market definitely needs more sanitization, more trust building, and more demand generation. Again, all goals that the Commission can play an important part in. And finally, the volunteer markets face structural constraints in meeting certain high integrity requirements. So the fact that the market is voluntary automatically excludes them or constrains them from meeting every single high integrity requirement. It's difficult to achieve predictable financing. It's difficult to integrate with existing regulatory frameworks. There's a lot of uncertainty with voluntary frameworks, which automatically then can play can be a challenge in ensuring a lot of the high integrity criteria that are required in nature markets. Now, that is also an opportunity to work together with policy to make sure that these gaps are filled and there's incentives to participate in this market, especially from the demand side. We believe there's a lot of potential there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simas, for a very clear presentation. Super interesting findings there from the benchmark study. We have some questions that came in the Q&A. One question relates to the risk of having excessive costs related to monitoring of biodiversity change, since we all know that there is often advantages of actually conducting in situ data collection rather than relying on remote sensing. Do you think, Simas, is there like some sort of trade-off here between different data collection techniques, and are there any ways that you could kind of find a suitable trade-off for different projects? Could you elaborate on that, perhaps?
Yeah, well, that's a very important question for all volunteer biodiversity projects, but I think especially in Europe. Um, and for that, we need to be creative in the way we measure biodiversity gains, I think, and we need to acknowledge what is possible and what is not. So there's a couple of, I think, variables we can think about. So one big characteristic of the volunteer biodiversity market is that it is, for the most part, based on outcomes. So if you achieve a certain biodiversity gain that is proven by certain metrics you have collected, right? So it's real data you're working with. That's kind of the promise of the volunteer biodiversity market. That said, to collect that data in a granular, consistent, high integrity manner is costly. So there's also another way to issue credits, which is so-called practice-based method, where instead of quantifying outcomes and verifying outcomes, you focus on practice that are known for that ecosystem to be, let's say, nature positive or beneficial, and then you just verify that these practices have been conducted and you issue credits based on that. And actually, there's a couple of very promising European credit schemes that are doing just that. Um, and hopefully we can have more experience experimenting with them as well, where again they're based on practices, and it seems that certification and monitoring costs related to them are much lower than other schemes. So that might make smaller projects more viable. And you know, it also comes with a trade-off, which is if you verify if you verify practices, you cannot make certain claims that you have, let's say, regenerated or led to biodiversity gains of X% or X points, etc., since you're not measuring that. So then if we're looking at the claims hierarchy, it's lower than the outcomes. It just has to be. But maybe that's the trade-off that we need to make sure that these projects, especially smaller projects in Europe, are bankable. So I think that's something to consider. And yeah, especially the practice-based methodologies hold a lot of potential in the European landscapes.
Thanks, Dimas. Great quest, great answer. So another question that comes in here is, did you consider data on projects that did not work out? Uh, Given the fact that some old standards have had a high percentage of projects that not work out well. Um, was that something that you was part of the selection that you maybe you can say some more words on that, the first initial screening you did?
Mhm. I guess that refers to the volunteer biodiversity projects, right? And let's say the rates of which
Yeah.
ones are selected and which ones are not. We did, we did, and again, the data is hard to come by in a consistent manner, but from what we've seen, for sure, there's a significant number of pilots that, after the pilot stage, decide not to move forward, and the experiment is done. We don't have conclusive data on um, which standard maybe or standards lead to a lot of these seemingly unbankable projects, but we definitely are aware of a lot of these cases, and what we do what we can, which is we try to understand why that happened, what's the reason, and how can we prevent uh, you know our own projects or the projects of the consortium. We're not part of them as Bloom Labs, but how can we prevent these projects from following the same path? So it's really it's anecdotal so far, but it is an important consideration, especially moving forward. We want to make sure that as we apply these schemes, we keep in touch, keep tabs of the all the key credit schemes and understand which projects are selective, how are they doing, what can we learn, what can we, both good and the bad. There's a lot to learn on both sides.
Yeah. Thanks, Dimas. Another question that came in, which I think is important to bring up, relates to permanence or durability that we often say instead in the biodiversity credit market. The question that came in was, in the existing BD credit schemes, how is the long-term efficiency of conservation actions assessed? The permanence requirement is keystone for the credibility of any scheme. So I guess perhaps during your benchmark study, you kind of got some sort of idea of the requirements in methodologies around permanence. So um,
Mhm.
elaborate on that, Simas.
Great question, and I think there's two ways you can look at it. You can look at the project length requirements. That's one dimension. So a lot of credit schemes will require projects to be at least 5, 15, 30, sometimes more years in length. That's so if you want to issue credits using that scheme, you have to then um, yeah, uh, you have a liability that you have to kind of sign up for, which is important for durability, but again, can be very difficult if it comes to enforcing that and communicating voluntarily with landowners to restrict their land use for decades. That's a difficult conversation that really needs to make sense for them as well. So you can mandate a minimum project length, or you can mandate the minimum project length, credit length. So you know, like I shared, there's three dimensions to biodiversity credit unit: outcome or activity, area size, and then duration. So some projects simply do not allow, or some projects only allow issuing credits that represent 20 years worth of outcomes. And then as long as your credits are, like, the project has to be at least as long. Uh, and in terms of, let's say, permanence, you don't have the topic is a bit different here compared to carbon because, it's, um, let's say, it can be more difficult to ensure with biodiversity, and we do not have, let's say, full control over it, or projects do not have full control over it. So, we need to be realistic here, but yeah, that's an unresolved. I described it, but I don't have an answer for this because Nobody knows what will happen in a decade or two, but that's a very important topic in the space, especially on the volunteer side, and that requires tough conversations with landowners.
Great answer, Simas. I think this is definitely a tough question at this point, since there might actually exist various solutions for creating permanence and durability in different countries, actually. And some of these solutions are not really kind of adapted to biodiversity credit projects as they could be. So I guess that's also one takeaway from this discussion, that there probably needs to be more work done on in each European member states on actually creating those permanence solutions, or let's say durability solutions. So I think we will end up this Q&A with one more question that came in on a very general question on how many projects that covers peatlands. Are there any unique considerations for peatlands specifically? I guess this is something you can also relate to your work with the database at bloomlabs, Simas.
Sorry, the question how many peatland projects have we come across, or how many
Yeah,
sites have we assessed that are peatlands? These can be
I
two.
think I mean, I guess uh, if you have come across during the benchmark study or your work with a database in general, like how common is it that you see projects that covers peatlands, peatland restoration, for example?
Um, Well, by far the most common project or ecosystem addressed globally, not just within Europe, are forests. That's just a given. Now within Europe, it's a bit more diverse. There's more wetlands that are also being piloted. Peatlands in the grand scheme of things, it's a small number. We are or the project Live BiodivCrEW is one of the, let's say, pioneering projects focused on that. We have previous EU Life projects or EU funded projects that have been doing work in peatlands for quite a while and we have a lot to learn from them. But actual standalone commercial projects from one of the schemes we have assessed, I cannot think of any. I think there's been some multi-ecosystem projects where peatlands are involved, but they were not the priority ecosystem. That said, for us, we have seen a lot of potential in peatlands in our sourcing experience, especially because it has both biodiversity and carbon benefits that, if done well, might make more projects bankable in a high integrity manner. So let's see. We're very excited about peatlands from our own perspective. One of our consortium members, aeco, specializes in peatland project development, and there's a lot more to be done in peatlands.
Great. Thank you, Simas. I think now that it's time for us to move into the second session. Thanks all of you in the audience for being very active, and we can see now that it's a lot of questions that comes in. So keep that activity level up. So we really kind of encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A box. The next session that we will go into now will be presented by Inga Kuse, who she is the business development lead at Eurosite, and she will be presenting to us the challenges of sourcing biodiversity credit projects and some initial learnings from that. So over to you, Inga.
Thank you very much, Martin. Yes, I'm happy to present the work we did in sourcing biodiversity credit projects throughout Europe. And this work was done led by us at Eurosite and by ELO partners in the project. And next slide, please. So a few words about Eurosite. Although I'm pretty sure you all know what is Eurosite. We are the network of organizations that work with land conservation, and we are proud to represent our members in 26 European countries. Next slide, please. So the process of site selection can be described in four major steps. The first one is screening, where we reached out in our networks to our partners and members, both Eurosite and ELO. Also, our partners aeco and NABU helped by looking in their networks for suitable projects for biodiversity credits. And once we identified the projects, we went through several loops of information back and forth to prepare the information that is actually needed to understand whether this project is suitable for biodiversity credits. On the basis of that, then we proposed the sites to our consortium, and the site selection was done in a collaborative process of site selection workshops, internal site selection workshops in the project. We looked at 28 sites in 8 EU countries, and it's still a process, but we have arrived at the initial decision to proceed with project idea notes, probably with 6 sites to date. It does not mean that the other sites were not suitable for biodiversity credits. It just means that the limitations of our project led to those 6 sites being the best ones we selected. And then when the site is selected, project partner aeco starts working on the project idea node. That is the first step in developing the biodiversity credit. And we are currently somewhere here in this stage where aeco has finished several project idea nodes for some of the projects and will start with the next ones. And then the final step, where the project development documentation is presented, we are not there yet, so that will be done afterwards. Next slide, please. So what are the criteria for the site selection? I have very little time. I will not discuss them all. Ecological importance, that is pretty straightforward. For restoration potential, we actually spend quite a lot of time discussing the uplift versus avoided loss projects, meaning that a project has to demonstrate enough improvement in the nature and biodiversity situation to qualify to generate the credits. And for sites that are with a high biodiversity already, that was an issue where we had to consider also that uplift maybe is not the right category and avoided loss would rather be considered there. Another element that proved to be very, very important in our site selection process was stakeholder awareness and engagement. Quite a lot of projects were in early stages of stakeholder engagement, and that meant that we had to discard them as rather long-term projects that will need to do a lot of work before we can proceed with restoration to have stakeholders on board as well. Technical readiness was more or less the same situation. Quite a lot of projects were not in an advanced enough stage of planning, where it was not entirely clear what needs to be done and how much it costs. That is another very important element. Financial feasibility, of course, the price, how much the restoration costs, and also size matters. Simas already covered it a bit, but of course, given the costs that are there for certifying and for baselining and for everything, so it means that it's important how many credits the site can generate actually to cover the costs. So I think I'm stopping here. Next slide, please. So thank you for your time, your attention. And we would like to show you how this is done by having 2 pitches today, presenting the potential biodiversity credit projects, and our experts will give feedback on those. And with that, I am very happy to hand over to David, who will present the first project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Inga. Good morning to you all, and thank you to Eurosite for organizing this webinar and for creating this space for dialogue and exchange. My name is David Alvarez, CEO of EcoAXA, and together and in collaboration with Ambient, I'm pleased to present the flagship project of our Biodiversity Capital Group initiative, the restoration and conservation of hydrological basins. A project that explores how sustainable river basin management can be financed over long term. Next slide, please. I would explain the criteria that Inga has already mentioned. The project is located in the municipality of Macastre on the eastern coast of Spain, with a landscape shaped by forest Mediterranean ecosystems and seasonal hydrological basins. The intervention covers roughly 1,600 hectares with an estimated overall budget of around 6-7 million euros, including design, management, restoration, and long-term conservation, which for us is, as Seamus mentioned, one of the most relevant aspects of this project. The land is owned by a forest landowners association, which from 40 years agreement is already signed. It's important as well to highlight that the area has been severely affected by wildfires and a severe cut-off law at Dana a few years ago that you might all know, leading therefore to a deep ecological degradation and a loss of the soil's natural regeneration capacity. Therefore, this makes ecological restoration not just relevant, but essential. Next slide, please. The intervention area lies within a Mediterranean context, is strongly influenced by fluvial systems and seasonal hydrological dynamics, which makes it especially sensitive. Here, water and soil are the key drivers of ecological functioning. For this reason, the project is structured around three main pillars: water management, biodiversity restoration, and the recovery of soil functionality, as well and considering all the stakeholders in this project. These components are currently under pressure for several threats: accelerated erosion, reduced infiltration, disruption of hydrological regimes, and soil degradation, and together with broader landscape and other biodiversity challenges. In response to these challenges and to these characteristics, the project applies a holistic nature-based approach, placing integrated restoration and biodiversity enhancements at the core of the project. This also brings challenges related to governance, ecosystem management, long-term funding, and the measurement and monitoring of ecosystem services and nature-based credits. Next slide, please. The foreseen activities focus on regulating the water cycle to reduce flood risk, restore native vegetation, improving soil infiltration, and recovering habitats through mosaic lands approach will take place, and therefore interventions in the project covers not only forest and river ecosystems, but also agricultural, forestry as mentioned, and river and stream system, which adds significant complexity. Therefore, restoration efforts aim to recover the ecological structure across all these systems rather than treating them independently. In parallel, natural regeneration is promoted as a key process, combining targeted reforestation with assisted natural regeneration and the maintenance of areas of high ecological value. Next slide, please. So therefore, what improvement does the project provide or deliver? One of the main impact is water management improvement and a clear increase of biodiversity through the different ecological restoration activities. Also, flood risk is reduced by restoring vegetation cover in strategic areas, lowering the surface runoff, and improving water regulation. At the same time, reforestation and natural regeneration increase native vegetation, creating habitats and resources for local fauna. Altogether, all these processes built in a more diverse, functional, and resilient ecosystem, better prepared for future disturbances as this project faced in the past. Next slide, please. Finally, regarding the project readiness, restoration plans have already kicked off and several activities have already been implemented on the ground. The next of activities, the full deployment aligned with seasonal conditions, which are really relevant in this place, is expected for the following months and the following years. The project is supported by a dedicated team working through a mosaic restoration approach based on collaboration between specialized entities with expertise in ecosystem restoration, riverine and wetland systems, and locally adapted solutions. In parallel, an innovative market-based mechanism, it's being developed to either engage public administrations, companies, NGOs, certification bodies, and funding organisms. The goal basically is to create a structured system of measurable and verifiable nature credits capable of channeling long-term investments into ecosystems recovery, conservation, and ecosystem services provision. That's all from my side, and happy to solve whatever questions you might have.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Super interesting to hear about this project. I think that we have just time for maybe a short comment or question from Talita or Mark. So Talita, I can pass the word to you, and if you want to ask a question or just make a reflection or a comment, please do.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about the site itself. I'm Talita, I'm from aeco. I am a biodiversity project developer. So why this site is potentially very good for PDD development, for example, is what David already presented to us. There is a clear restoration need and uplift for potential. Depending on the standard, the uplift needs to be very clear. And in this site, for example, there is a before and after story that is easier to communicate to buyers. Aside from that, the additionality needs to be well assessed. In this case, without external finance, the restoration would happen at this scale. The site is big enough. It's too big, and without this, the financing, that would not be possible. And from a biodiversity perspective, there is a good monitoring in place. One thing that we learned while selecting sites for PDD and PINS development is that good monitoring, it is super needed, and the project will have an easier start and easy evaluation once the monitoring is in place, and this site also have one. That's from my side.
Talita, very helpful comment. Maybe Mark, if you have some short comment, you're welcome to do that. And if not, then I think we can probably just move on to the second pitch. Thank you very much, David, again for this highly interesting and relevant presentation. We now move on to the second example, which is from Belgium, a Belgium project that will be presented by the landowner manager, Gabrielle. So over to Gabrielle.
Hello, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Very good. So thanks for hosting me today. My name is Gabriel, and I'm a private landowner and manager of lands on the border of Belgium and the Netherlands. And what we want to present you today is a project we have on this land intended to not only restore but also protect Natura 2000 marshes and wetlands with relatively fragile habitats and rare species that are located on our estate and next to a major industrial site in the Netherlands. This project focuses on hydrology and also water quality, converting farmland back to nature and restoring eventually a more resilient system. So we have taken some initial steps, such as rewilding some parts of the farmland, drainage closures, and the installation of natural reedbed water filtration systems. But there are various further measures that we planned across an area that you see on this map, spanning over 200 hectares, with an estimated cost of over 300,000 euros for this phase, and permitting being on the way. Now you see on the map, the area is pretty narrow. This is because it's in the lowest part of the estate, which is the part through which all the water flows from Belgium towards the Netherlands. In terms of ecosystem types, I think this site is pretty unique because it combines rare peat and marsh Natura 2000 habitats alongside damp habitat forests, marshes, and also transitional shrubland, with a highly dynamic hydrological system and full sort of dry, wet gradient, making it both a high-value conservation site and also large-scale restoration opportunity within a pretty connected landscape that we control from end to end. So,
Gabriel,
while
sorry to
the
break in. Could you please suggest? I think the presentation is still in presentation mode, so if you can change that, perhaps.
Yes, is it better like this?
Perfect, thank you.
Oh, okay. So while the project map you're seeing here does not cover the whole site, I think it shows really well how we address nature restoration, and this is one of the main parts of a restoration project. What it shows is how we approach farmland conversion at scale. Here you see that we are introducing permits right now to combine water buffering areas by digging new marshes, also setting up water purification areas through adding new reedbed systems, but also reforestation, which for ecological connectivity is very important in this area, and the development eventually of more diverse, biodiversity-rich grasslands. So I mentioned water a lot, and it's central in this story. What we're trying to do is to make sure we are able to buffer water better, to stabilize water levels and reduce peak inflows. And also, we focus on filtering through reedbed systems to remove excess nutrients, mainly nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as specific pollutants. So this improves water quality, this limits eutrophication, this limits hydrological stress, and eventually protects the peat, the marshes, and a series also of species-rich, nutrient-poor grassland habitats. And these conditions, through hydrology, are very important to restore and also sustain biodiversity in such habitats. In terms of budget, we already financed for this specific phase all design and permitting related studies. And we are now looking for financing avenues for an additional 340,000 euros to execute the works I just mentioned. These works are mainly composed of excavations of wetlands, closing existing drainage ditches, but also planting a significant amount of trees and other vegetation types. In terms of baseline data, as a starting point, we have a pretty strong data foundation. We have mapped existing habitat types, we have mapped vegetation and species, and we also carried out pretty expensive analysis of hydrology, but also water quality and soil conditions. this is because we went through permitting, but also because we have our own nature management plans with certain ambitions related to biodiversity. So this provides us a baseline across various dimensions and allows us to effectively monitor progress going forward. So, what do we expect in terms of uplift? The restoration should drive an uplift by enabling the recovery of these Natura 2000 marshes and species-rich meadows. It should also support key species. There's various, but to give an example, the key species, the bittern, another the spoonbill, and obviously beyond the site itself, it strengthens ecological connectivity and creates corridors between surrounding wetlands. And this is actually pretty key for long-term species resilience because they need to be intertwined in broader ecosystems. And I think below pictures shows you pretty well that some wetlands are still cut or isolated by pieces of farmland here and there. These things need to be integrated more logically from an ecological point of view. So in terms of timeline, as I mentioned already, required studies for permitting have been done. We are working on the permits now and they will be introduced end of April or in March. In terms of baseline monitoring, we have quite some data. We would obviously still need to set deep priorities in terms of what we want to monitor because we obviously have some options. And implementation, if we have the permits, would take approximately 3 months. So it's not too long in terms of executing this. And yeah, monitoring will focus on water levels, water quality, vegetation, which is really key because if you do the right thing on hydrology, you see effectively more unique or habitat-specific vegetation types emerging. And then obviously species also related to certain habitats. I won't spend too much time on project readiness because we mentioned it. We own the land, so we directly control the project. We're pretty advanced in permitting. Technically, the studies have been done. And regarding monitoring, we feel we're in a pretty good and advanced position as well. So I'll stop here. Thank you for your attention and I'll give it over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Gabriel. Also a super interesting project to have a look at. I think we can go to Talita for a quick comment and then some questions from the audience.
Yes, this is another example of a site that we evaluated too, and we eventually got interested in developing a PIN and potentially a PDD because of the big baseline monitoring that is already established. One thing that became very clear when selecting site is that when the landowner or the land manager is already engaged and they already have a clear plan for the restoration, if the project is an uplift one or for the avoided loss, it becomes very clear. It becomes very easy to calculate and becomes very easy to pick the proper standard for starting the project in this case. And in this site in particular, the water purification co-benefits is very important. I guess bloomlabs already flagged for us the potential to demonstrate that the water purification there benefits the benefit flow directly to the industries in the region. So that creates a project that is very attractive for potential buyers, for example. And I guess I have a question that for me was interesting and is a little bit related to the site. That is, did you find many prospective projects? I guess that many prospective projects were unbankable. What was the most common reason for this? For me, as a biodiversity project developer, I guess the most reason is the size and the cost for the restoration, if it is an uplift project. And then it will come again, the price and this cost benefits that we need to think during the feasibility phase of a project depends on the standard that we want to apply. There are standards that don't accept avoided loss projects, for example. So in a restoration project, obviously it's more costly, and we need to play a little bit with the basket of metrics that we're going to pick to track the project and how the uplift is being calculated and detected with time. There are metrics that are easy to calculate, and there are metrics that we can adapt to use, for example, remote sensing, eDNA, that reduce a little bit the cost of the monitoring. But the restoration will depend on the site, the region, the location, and which are the interventions that have been done in the site. So it depends a lot on the history of the site. Okay, back to you, Martin.
Anita, and I think we can also pick up on a question that came in from Caitlin Brown. Oh, sorry, that was actually from another one. But the question is on how important the narrative is when choosing one site over another for biodiversity credits. I think that was actually an interesting question. Maybe Talita, you could elaborate on a little bit.
Yes, the narrative is super important because, as I said, once the project is live, we need to find buyers, and the buyers will buy the projects that they can understand the narrative very clearly. When the restoration plan is easy to envision because we know already what was the interventions, we know already what we have to do to detect or create the uplift, then it's super important and it's easier to perform the project. I'm not going to say that it's always easy because sometimes it's going to be very costly and hard work, but it's easy to communicate. So the narrative is super important.
Yeah, thanks, Talita. I definitely can second you on that one. And I think now, with respect of the timetable, the agenda for today's webinar, we need to move on to the third session. And thank you all for the activity in the question and answer chat box. I think that to answer one of the questions that came up a little bit earlier, we will be able to share the slides of this presentation, so don't worry there. You will be able to have them sent to you. I think we will try also during the webinar to answer the many unanswered questions that has come in already. So we will do our best to give you feedback on your questions for sure. So I guess we now can move on into the third session of the webinar. We will be now digging into the reality of biodiversity credit project finance. And for this, we will be given a presentation by Mark Maleka from Sylva. So Mark is a project developer, an environmental entrepreneur with a background spanning economics, sustainable finance, and nature-based solutions. So Sylva, the company that he co-founded, integrates Earth observation technology, digital MRV, and landscape scale analysis to support rigorous community-centered restoration finance. Okay, so please, Mark, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for having me. Next slide, please. So before we start, let me briefly talk about what Sylva does. We develop restoration projects and we build the technology to make them financeable. On the left, you can see our initiatives. Verde Vivo is our flagship. It's almost 6,000 hectares of reforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. It's native species ARR combined with sustainable timber to generate stable revenues. BiodivCrEW is the reason I'm here today, or we're all here today. So this is a LIFE project that brings us together. We are testing and piloting biodiversity credits in European wetlands and trying to figure out what works in European regulatory context. Sapi, Zimbabwe has 110,000 hectares of rewilding and grassland restoration. And we have various initiatives we are currently working on in our pipeline and combine different natural capital revenue streams to fund reforestation. On the right side is our project development, which covers the full chain from feasibility studies to financial due diligence, project development, and project structuring. Basically, we help projects get from idea to an investable product. Planetary intelligence, as we call this, our tech side, we use remote sensing and machine learning for biomass mapping, carbon stock estimation, deforestation risk modeling, and digital MRV. The last one, digital MRV, is the piece I will talk about today. The monitoring system that turns ecological outcomes into verifiable and tradable credits. satellite imagery, ground truthed against field data, and all of this feeding into reporting pipeline that investors and auditors can trust. So everything I will talk about today, cash flow structuring, MIV, offtakes, and bankability is what we work on every day. If any of this resonates with you, hit me up. Next slide. So most of you here already know about biodiversity loss. You also know about credit schemes, thanks to SIMAS. You probably read more policy papers on this topics than I have. What we often miss in these conversations is the financial structuring side and how you actually pay for a biodiversity project. So this is what we talk about today. So I want you to think about a biodiversity credit project the way you think of a toll road or a solar farm or a wind farm. So what does the cash flow look like over 20 or 30 years? Who takes which risk at which stage? When does the project break even? And the big one, can you actually get debt on it? Because if you cannot get debt, you're relying entirely on grants and equity, and that does never scale. So these 4 points in the slides are a roadmap for the next 15 minutes. We will look at the J-curve, what it is, the capital stack, why biodiversity is structurally harder to finance than other project types, and what we can do about it. And before we dig in, the why now at the bottom, last year the European Commission published its nature credits roadmap. It matters because it's the strongest signal yet that what is currently voluntary can become quasi-regulatory. So if nature credits get woven into CSRD and TNFD disclosures, the demand side changes completely. It moves from philanthropic to like small companies buying 50 euro contributions to institutional, and then suddenly corporates need to buy credits because they need to comply. And right now there's a window to shape these conversations and projects, and it's open right now. So if we get the financial architecture right in the next few years, then we can scale the market like Carbon did. If we get it wrong, we end up with a fragmented landscape of small projects that never attract serious capital. So next slide, please. So one important point before we go in, what I'm describing today applies to the voluntary biodiversity credits. Projects that need to find buyers in an open market. Habitat banks and regulatory offset schemes, Ökopunkte in Germany, BNG in the UK, they work differently. Their demand is compulsory. A real estate developer must buy offsets to get a building permit. That changes the cash flow picture significantly. That's a completely different talk. So if you have ever looked at a toll road or a solar farm or wind farm, you will recognize this shape on the slide. So big money goes out before money comes in. It's the defining feature of any project finance. And biodiversity follows exactly the same pattern. This is the J-curve, the accumulated cash flow of a biodiversity credit project over its full life cycle. Look at the left side of the curve. That deep dip is the valley of death. So site preparation, baseline, ecological surveys, feasibility studies, planting, restoration, earthworks, all of that. All of that is pure cost. There's zero revenue during the phase. And in Europe, the problem is actually worse than the tropics. And why? Because most European biodiversity projects are small, below 1,000 hectares. And at that scale, your fixed costs are spread over fewer units. So your cost per hectare goes up sharply. A 500 hectare wetland restoration has almost the same overhead than 5,000 one. So, but only a tenth of the output. So that is a fundamental scale problem. And it means the value of death is steeper relative to the revenue that follows. Now look at the right side. Revenue starts to trickle in, but this is where biodiversity diverges from traditional infrastructure. With a solar farm, you flip a switch on day one of operations and you start selling electricity with a clean handoff. With a wetland or forest, the ecosystem gradually emerges over years, sometimes decades. The habitat improves only slowly. The credits come only slowly. And there's no moment where you go from construction phase to operational phase. It is a continuous ramp. And that makes it extremely hard to structure debt because a lender wants to know when does revenue start. And the honest answer is like, we are not sure. It depends on the ecology, it depends on the weather, it depends on how fast verification bodies can assess the sites. So notice also that the project lifecycle arrows spans the full width of the chart. These are not 5-year projects, they are 20 to 40-year commitments. That is a very long time to ask capital to be patient. So the key takeaway, biodiversity projects have the same shape as infrastructure project, but the curve is slower, less predictable, and harder to model. That has huge consequences for how you finance them. Which brings us to the next question. Who actually pays for all of this? Next slide, please. So we've seen the J-curve. The question is now, who pays for all of this? Because the cash flow gap does not fill itself. You need a capital stack. Let us walk through it from left to right. In the early phase, year 0 to year 2, you need grants and blended finance, public money, concessional capital, EU programs like this one, EU LIFE or Horizon, development bank facilities. The job of this capital is simple. Absorb the risk the market cannot price yet. If you're a private investor looking at a biodiversity project in year 0, you see pure downside. No revenue, no track record, no proven methodology. Nobody rational puts private money into that without a cushion. And the concessional layer is that cushion. Without it, most projects never get off the ground. In the middle phase, you bring in debt or bridge finance, but there's a catch. A lender needs to see future revenue to underwrite a loan. There need to be visibility on when credits will be issued and who will buy them. In a market where most transactions are 100 euros and most buyers are small companies, that visibility does not yet exist. So that is very hard to access today. Equity of patient capital sits across the whole life cycle. It takes the first loss. It waits years for the upside. This is where impact investors come in, development finance institutions, family offices with a long-term horizon. They accept lower returns in exchange for impact, but they still need returns. And because this is not philanthropy. The fourth column is the most interesting to me, to what we do at Sylva, hybrid instruments. The idea is do not rely on biodiversity credits alone, stack them. And so combine biodiversity with carbon credits, with payment for ecosystem services, with sustainability-linked bonds. And wetlands are really a perfect example. A single wetland restoration delivers 4 things at once: uplift, carbon sequestration, water quality improvement, and cultural or recreational value. So 4 revenue streams from one project, and this is how we think we can make the economics work. Next slide. So you might say, so this sounds like any infrastructure project, like solar was 20 years ago, or wind farm had all the same problems. So what's the difference with biodiversity? Why is it structurally harder? 3 points. First, there's ecological uncertainty. When you build a solar farm, you know with high confidence how much electricity it will produce. There's decades of irradiance data. The technology is mature. When you restore a wetland, you do not know when it will recover, or if it will recover the way you modeled it. Soil conditions, hydrology, seed banks, weather events, they're all variables that no financial model can fully capture. An unexpected drought or invasive species can set your timeline back by years. Second, there's no track record to underwrite. Solar and wind have actuarial data going back decades. Banks can price risk because they have thousands of similar projects. Biodiversity credits have almost no performance history, unfortunately. We are completely stuck in a credibility gap. Buyers wait for standardization before they commit large volumes, but standardization needs transaction volume to develop, and volume needs buyers. It is unfortunately very circular. Third, credits are not fungible. A hectare of peatland in the Netherlands is not equivalent to a hectare of peatlands in Finland. There are 53 different crediting schemes across more than 14 jurisdictions. The metrics are incompatible. 2 projects with identical logical outcomes can generate different credit volumes under different schemes. And you unfortunately cannot build a liquid market on units that are not comparable. There's no commodity exchange for biodiversity. So now look at the green box on the right. That is the consequence. That's the bankability gap. There are no ring-fenced entities most of the time. So many projects sit inside NGOs or government agencies. So there's no standalone entity, an SPV, for a lender to underwrite. There's no recoverable collateral. You cannot foreclose on a wetland. There are no step-in rights, and there's no secondary market, and no pricing benchmarks. So investors assume the worst. They apply discount rates that kill the project immediately. So these things together are why almost no biodiversity project today can access commercial debt. And also keep in mind that we are not talking about niche projects. The Kunming Montreal framework calls for 30% of degraded ecosystems to be restored to be under restoration by 2030. That requires hundreds of billions in capital. Grants alone will never get us there. So closing this bankability gap is not optional. It's the very bottleneck for the entire global biodiversity agenda. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So we've seen the problem. The J-curve is long, the capital stack has gaps, and the risk is structural. The question is, what do we do about it? And here are 4 design principles that can make biodiversity projects investable. Number 1 is securing an offtake. Think about a solar farm, how a solar farm gets financed. It is because there's a purchase power agreement, a 20-year contract with a utility. That's predictable revenue, it's bankable cash flow, and biodiversity should aim for the same thing, forward purchase agreements with creditworthy counterparties. Without offtake, you cannot model the cash flow. Without cash flow, you cannot get debt. Without debt, you are stuck with grants and equity, and that does not scale. Number 2, build for verifiability, not just ecology. This is where some projects fall short. They focus on the science or the benefits, but forget the finance. The MRV system, monitoring, reporting, and verification, is just not a scientific tool. It is the bridge between ecology and finance. If an investor cannot independently verify credits, they will not buy them. The data has to be open, audible, and machine readable. And number 3, price the nature risk and the policy gap. Right now, nobody has a good model for pricing nature risk. So what do investors do? They assume the worst. They apply a discount rate of 15, 20% or more. At those rates, no biodiversity project is viable. So we need tools to bring the risk down. Buffer pools, insurance is tied to milestones. And most importantly, public first loss capital. If a development bank takes the first 20% of losses, for example, the remaining risk becomes quantifiable and the discount rates come down and the project becomes financeable. Number 4, structure for replicability. The first projects in this market matter more than any project that comes after them. They set the template. So use standard contracts that others can copy. Publish your financial model. Share your MRV data openly. Every early deal thus builds the track records the entire market needs. We are not just financing one project. We are building the infrastructure for a market. And that is exactly what we're doing here, what we're doing here with BiodiversityCREW, testing these principles in European wetlands. And every pilot that publishes and documents what went wrong brings the next projects one step closer to being financeable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for that presentation. Super interesting. It's good to really get your sober and realistic eyes on this topic, because this is really also important for those planning to design and develop future biodiversity credit, to really have these takeaways in mind that you just brought us. One question that came up during your presentation, Mark, from Jose, I think could be important to mention. He says, a question for the panel: differently from carbon markets, where the carbon credit as an asset is linked to a palpable unit, a ton of CO2 equivalents, biodiversity framework standards, methodologies all follow different approaches. This not only makes comparability impossible, but also creates an irregular and unstable language for the market and between the market with demand. What is your personal view on this, and can the market grow with an unclear and non-consensual asset behind it? Mark, do you think you will be able to comment on that question or give some sort of answer?
Yeah, actually, it's a very good question. It touches upon a internal conflict that I have myself. So for me, biodiversity is not a commodity. But at the same time, we need the commoditization of biodiversity in order to scale the market, in order to protect it. So yeah, there are conflicting views that contradict each other, and they're both true. I do not have, well, depending on which hat I'm wearing, I have a clear answer. But yeah, so both is true. Biodiversity is not a commodity, but we need commodification in order to scale the market.
Thank Mark. Yeah, for sure. I mean, biodiversity is not a commodity, although something that we actually can price is the costs of the restoration activities or the costs of maintenance. So for sure, when we talk about pricing credits, what we mean really, I guess, is that we could put a price on that costly additional management or restoration activities. So another question, how can you find an off-taker if the market is still voluntary? It seems as if buyers don't exist yet, and you touch upon that, Mark, a little bit in your presentation.
Yeah, so that's what we are doing here with BiodivCrEW. So we're developing a portfolio of projects, and then we're going to go to market. Some of the projects will have, quote unquote, only biodiversity uplift. Some of the others will have co-benefits in terms of carbon or ecosystem services benefits, like the one in Belgium, and so it will be interesting to see how the market is reacting to those projects. We're gonna obviously, for the ones that have PES benefits, approach companies that will benefit from an improvement, say in water regulation, purification, and provisioning. Carbon is an obvious point where any company that wants to engage in climate mitigation can buy those credits. So yeah, answering your question, try to tie biodiversity outcomes with additional benefits that companies can benefit from. But yeah, the market is very, very early. What we're doing here is pioneering work.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I think another question that actually comes from me here is, like you mentioned, long-term offtake agreements being, of course, very, very attractive for many project developers or many project owners. And of course, from a buyer perspective, a long take offtake agreement could actually be quite risky from a business perspective. So, what do you think is really needed now in terms of making it easier for corporates to actually engage in long-term offtake agreements? Are there something that could be done from, let's say, governmental levels or some sort of support that could be given to those corporates? Or have you any thoughts around this?
Yeah, what is needed is volume, and you get volume through standardization and standardized rails, so on ramps. So it is, as a developer, we cry and we cry and demand regulation, and ideally we demand regulation. That's why this project is so great on a very large geography. So what is true for one certain part of is also true in other areas of where 400 million people live, and that's how create scale. So standardization, scale, and that can lead to volume, but also then clear benefits for the corporate buyers, what they will get as a utility from purchasing a biodiversity credit.
Mark, we have another question coming in. Do you see a possibility to design forward purchasing agreements, like, for example, ex-ante issuance, so that they also finance the early phase of project implementation?
I mean, yes, this is kind of done in the carbon world. So where companies, buyers can do pre-financing was done, but also once you have say a forward agreement, you take this, which is basically it's a check in a way, and you walk with this forward purchase agreement to an investor, who will then happily lend you the money or provide you the financing, or government institutions will also provide you financing on the back of a forward purchase agreement.
Thank you. Yeah, also, Mark, you mentioned the possibility of actually having co-benefits to your biodiversity credit projects and of course, the attractiveness from a project owner perspective of having many different ecosystem services commodified and unitized, and being able to have many multiple revenue streams coming in. What would be the main risks you think in general with having stacked designs overall?
I think we should not lose sight what we're trying to achieve here. So, the biodiversity should be an outcome of everything that we do. And if we lose track of that, if we only do projects for carbon, then I think that's probably one of the biggest conflicts internally when you develop a project.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question here. What is currently the most credible pathway to make biodiversity credit projects bankable, specifically in terms of predictable revenue streams and risk allocation?
I
You
would say
mentioned,
carbon. I would say carbon.
Mm.
So, and that's why peatlands are so interesting, because they offer huge carbon benefits.
That's a good answer, and it also kind of connects to the, I guess, the interesting opportunity that now comes with the CRCF, the carbon farming regulation, and the potential of actually having co-benefits by nature credits or biodiversity credits. That could, of course, be one way of creating some sort of early demand for nature credits. So,
yeah,
absolutely.
But going forward, and now having a wish list of things that hopefully the regulators could implement is thinking around not only carbon but also ecosystem services, and looking at biodiversity credits as an infrastructure play. So having ecosystem services as an outcome that improve. The bee pollination is always the most cited example, but like water provisioning, water regulation, and in Northern Europe we have so many peatlands, and they can provide tons of value in climate change mitigation.
Yeah, that's a great point. And from an investment point of view, de-risking is always crucial and very important. So many of those restoration outcomes could actually, seen from a natural asset point of view, de-risk your investments in total. So for sure, that's definitely important work ahead to kind of try to make that easier for investors to see the connection between ecological restoration outcomes and de-risking of investments. Okay, I think that there is, I don't think we have any more questions now for this session. So I think we can now move on. Thank you all. Thank you, Mark, especially for your insights and for your experiences. Very interesting presentation. I think we can actually move on to the closing remark. So yeah, I guess this is this is a privilege I have as moderator to really have the last word here. So I will just kind of try to wrap this very interesting webinar with some considerations for next steps. And I think if we have a look at this from the supply side, the product development side, I think we can definitely say that by this project, we have seen good examples of how biodiversity credits as an instrument can be used for European wetland projects, both for pure restoration projects as well as conservation maintenance kind of projects. CMAS also kind of gave us an idea of what kind of methodologies we have out there at the moment and the variation between them. And obviously there is potential now for the EU Nature Credit Roadmap Initiative to actually help standardize the market a little bit, and making sure that the issues that come out from methodologies out on the market are as similar as possible. Then also, of course, from the pitches, we see that many of these projects are based on actions carried out in many different ecosystems. So the methodologies that we apply as project developers need to be generic and, let's say, wide enough in terms of scope so that you could actually be able to apply them on different ecosystems. Also, just super important to kind of be aware of the realities of smallholders in general from a European perspective. So making sure that we can reduce the costs for monitoring, for administration, perhaps having a look at the already existing grouped designs that we see in the carbon credit projects, and transfer those good examples of how you can actually configure projects with many different smallholders under the same credit projects. We also touched upon this question about how we define outcomes from these projects, and it's really kind of going to the core of the definition of biodiversity credits, that we often see it as an evidence, a verified condition-based outcome, and sometimes we must, I think, consider whether we could rely sometimes on activities instead of conditions, especially for restoration projects that are heavily depending on some sort of initial intervention. It could be stream restoration or wetland restoration, where you actually have some sort of hydrological stress that you need to remove, for example, from this ecosystem in order for it to recover. So kind of maybe thinking in the future of having some sort of hybrid definition of outcomes where we can accept activities as basis of credit issuance in the early years to enable landowners and product developers to get their first critical revenues coming into the projects. And then later on, when the actual ecological condition increases, sort of switching to condition-based outcome verification. Then, of course, we discussed stacking. Stacking, as Mark mentioned, is really a very, very interesting opportunity for many projects that actually results in multiple ecosystem service benefits. And the important thing is to kind of reach some sort of consensus around what safeguards would be needed in those stacked projects. So if we apply one intervention that leads to improvements in many ecosystem services, that might end up in a situation where we sell credits based on one single intervention, which could lead to a problem with additionality. So, but if we find other ways of kind of clearly separating activities that leads to improvements in separate ecosystem services, we might sort of have a way of getting around that additionality problem in stacked projects. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. And of course, the demand side considerations are probably the most important considerations at this point, trying to really find a good way of creating the early demand on the volunteer market. There is definitely not a strong regulatory demand basically in anywhere, perhaps except in England with the BNG. But otherwise, we see that the volunteer demand is not super strong, and there needs to be clear use cases for how to use voluntary created credits. So now we basically are relying on philanthropic purchases and use cases. There is, of course, many interesting potential use cases that are being kind of discussed at the moment, for example, relating to insetting or to, let's say, supply chain resilience, where you can, as a company, sort of mitigate some of your supply chain impacts, not as a way of offsetting necessarily, but merely as a way of strengthening the resilience in your supply chains, and using biodiversity credits from restoration projects as a way of demonstrating that. Just stating the obvious, I guess, here, that integrity in projects will be very important for buyers. Like, the credits, if they are going to be seen as of high integrity, there needs to show that they're aligned with the high-level principles that was mentioned in Sima's presentation. Let's say the standard now for high integrity among biodiversity credits. So any new kind of methodology and products that are being developed needs to take these high-level principles into account. It's super important, of course. And if we take a look at the buyers, perhaps the corporate buyers, they also need very clear guidance on what they can how they can communicate around these purchases, the claims they can make on a purchase. Let's say you, for example, purchase a number of credits as a spot purchase. The question obviously comes up, for how many years will you actually be able to claim something around biodiversity improvements? So there is still a lot of questions around claims that need to be sorted out. Obviously, we see now that also that there's a lot of work that could be done on trying to identify the actual barriers for market entry for demand-side actors. There is always, of course, a risk for reputational risk when going into nature credit markets. So probably it would be worthwhile to focus attention on various de-risking mechanisms, such as, for example, if a buyer can, together with other buyers in coalitions, maybe enter market and fund certain projects. Another de-risking kind of mechanism could be, for example, to partner with large environmental NGOs to sort of have their support from the beginning in projects. And also something that comes up is like these projects, and especially credits coming from large projects, they are so very difficult to evaluate from a buyer perspective. So what we see now also is that it seems like specialized companies working with project rating is actually starting to provide services to corporates and helping them out in understanding risks with certain projects. Especially during the last year, we've seen this development. It's similar as we see in the carbon market. Okay, we can take the next slide. And then for the overall market development, some considerations. I think this has been touched upon by both Simas and Mark. Obviously, there's a strong potential in having active government support on the national level. So government agencies could provide solutions and mechanisms for blended finance. We can also get a lot of kind of infrastructure support from governments, such as registries, also clarity around eligibility for projects in general, and also be supported in quality assurance, for example, validation and verification. These critical elements could be provided or at least facilitated by governments. And we see some good examples in some European countries where governments have actually been quite active, but there is also in many countries basically nothing happening at the moment. So much more activity could be actually could be seen in many countries around this. We also are very interested in seeing how regulated compliance-based markets and voluntary markets could actually integrate or be interoperable in the future. So from a project perspective, it would of course be very beneficial if you could, let's say, design and implement activities that could generate credits that could be sold on both markets. That would of course require you to have very, very standardized ways of measuring biodiversity. And it would need, of course, to comply with other sorts of requirements for ecological equivalence, for example. But that this is something, let's say, a little bit of a pattern that we see in the carbon market, that sort of voluntary carbon credits are being more and more kind of to a high extent accepted on regulated markets. So it's sort of a trend that will be interesting to follow as well on the biodiversity credit market. And lastly, we are also extremely interested to see what's happening with the CRCF and the carbon farming framework within the EU, and to what extent nature credit biodiversity can be used as good examples of the nature co-benefits to carbon projects that could actually be a way of catalyzing early demand. So that was all I planned to say here, and the next steps. Obviously, the project really wants to understand the buyer's needs, and also would like to find buyers and link buyers to the pilot projects. And obviously, the question to all of you in the audience, if you know anyone that could be interested in looking at these projects and maybe also funding the projects, you should get in touch with the BiodivCrEW team. There will be another webinar in the autumn focusing on markets. It will be announced later on, and then there will be a Eurosite annual conference in November, where there will be talks and discussions around nature credits, and a best practice report to be published early in 27. So with that, I will be ending this webinar, and I again thank you a lot for your active engagement and all your comments, and we really are happy to take a look at them and get back to you, to some of you that posted important questions in the question and answer. So with that, I think I can say on behalf of the team, goodbye, and hope to see you again in the future.